Hello and welcome to a presentation on Disability Support Services from the Learning Resource Center. The focus of this presentation is going to be on Accessible Information Management, or AIM, which is our DSS portal that we introduced in October of 2016 to manage our disability support services. I'm going to be going over some updates that have come as a result of implementing AIM on our campus. The first of which is the manner in which faculty receive letters of accommodations is now exclusively via email. How this is different from the past is that before, letters of accommodation were printed on hard copies of paper in the DSS office. Students would come to our office and pick up 2 copies of the letters and deliver them both to the professor. The professor would then sign 1 copy, and the students would return that copy to us. The professors could keep 1 copy for their records as well. Students would have to find a time either before or after class or during a professor's office hours to have those letters reviewed and signed. What we noticed with this process was that students oftentimes complained that it was embarrassing to have to give their letters to their professors in front of their classmates because finding a time before or after class where they were by themselves with the professors was quite difficult. One student even professed that the professor waived their letter of accommodation in front of the class and asked, "What am I supposed to do with this?" which made the student obviously feel some level of stress and anxiety as a result of that interaction. For students with mobility disabilities, this process was an undue burden on them, having to go run around campus getting letters signed and bringing them back to our office in a timely manner so that they could get set up with their accommodations. How AIM will help with this is that now delivering the letters of notification via email provides the professors with the same amount of information and actually a little bit more, which I'll go into later, but it's now in a more discreet manner than the students having to bring the actual letters, physical letters, to the professor and then back to our office. The emails will have links to specific information about the specific accommodations that the student has. So if you as a professor have some questions about perhaps what it means to have a note taker in a class, and then it'll say that DSS is going to arrange to find a note taker for the student in the class. So you know that's going on, but there's very little that you as the professor have to do in order to make sure that accommodation is met. In addition, students don't have to walk around with this confidential information in their backpacks. It might fall out in the hallway, and they have that kind of undue burden or level of stress trying to make sure that they don't somehow misplace these confidential letters within that week's time when they're trying to get them all signed by their professors and then returned back to our office. So when students request an accommodation in your course, you'll be sent an accommodation letter via your CUW email always. The letter is going to list the student, the class, the accommodations that the student's requesting. And we ask, as always, to keep that information entirely confidential. Here's a copy of what a sample letter might look like when you receive a letter of accommodation in your email. You can see at the top it says the student's name. There's a little bit of information in the middle about DSS in general and contact information for our office should you have any questions. And as you go down, you can see the specific accommodations that the student is eligible to receive, and then a little bit more about those accommodations. And then in the red box towards the bottom, you'll see the alternative testing contract. That link will only be there if a student has testing accommodations, and I'll get into that a little bit more. So looking at alternative testing, if a student has an alternative testing accommodation, then the professor will have to fill out a testing contract. The old process was that professors received a proctoring form every time a student signed up for an exam in each class. The process was that the student signed up for the exam online on our website. The testing coordinator then sent the professor a proctoring form. The professor sent it back to our office, and then the testing coordinator sent out reminder emails to all parties about the exam the day before. It was a lot of back and forth between the student and our office and our office and professors. So what we noticed was that when professors had several students with testing accommodations in the same course, they would have to fill out the same proctoring form multiple times. There was one professor in particular who had 7 students in one class who were set up with accommodations. It got rather messy trying to make sure that each student was accounted for on all ends and that the professor approved each time and was giving the same information to our office. Students were also unable to see if they had signed up for their exams and when they had signed up for their exams because there was no email confirmation after signing up. With the new process and AIM being in place, the link to the testing contract is sent in that initial email that I showed you a few slides prior in the red box. That box will only be there if the student has testing accommodations. There is definitely scenarios where you might have a student in your class that has accommodations, and those accommodations do not include any sort of alternative testing. In that case, you would not have the testing contract to fill out. The professor will click the link to answer a series of questions regarding the exams, and that's the testing contract that you're completing at that time. That contract informs our office how the professor wants us to proctor exams for that specific course over the entirety of the semester. Here is a copy of what you'll see once you click that testing contract link within the letter of accommodation email. So you can see there's a series of questions, and I'll go over them in a little bit more detail in these next few slides. So what you'll have to answer in the testing contract is how you plan to deliver your exams to us. You have a few different options. You can upload them to our secure website. There'll be a link once you get the notification that your student signed up to test with us. You may also email them to lrctesting@cuw.edu. You can drop them off in the testing center, or if it's after hours, you can drop them off in the drop box outside the LRC. You'll also tell us what students in the classroom are allowed to use. There's a notes section available for you, and I would encourage you to add as much detail as possible so that our proctors know what to do once the student arrives at the testing center and they have all of their materials. We can check the testing contract and compare that with what the student has brought with them and ensure that the test is being proctored exactly how you would like it to be proctored for the students in the class. If you have any special software used for testing, add that in the notes so that we can make sure everyone is set up to go once they arrive in the testing center. You'll also let us know how you would like your exams returned to you. You can choose to pick them up. You can choose for our office to deliver them to your mailbox, or perhaps it's an online exam and it'll just be submitted electronically once the student completes their exam. Another question that's on the testing contract is in regards to what if a student who's testing in the testing center has a question on the exam. If they were in the classroom with you, they would very simply raise their hand and you may walk over to them and answer whatever questions that they have. If they're in the testing center, they don't have that option. So if you could just provide me perhaps with an email address or a telephone number where you would be accessible during the exam, or perhaps you would just like the students to write in the margin of the exam their question, and then you can address it at a later date once the student returns their exam to you. One part of the testing contract that has become particularly important and we noticed some issues with last semester is this question toward the end which asks how much time are students allowed in the classroom to test. You don't have to do any math on this. The system will automatically do the math for you and calculate time and a half or double time or whatever the student is qualified for. But if you could just enter in the regular class exam link for exams, finals, midterms, and quizzes. I would highly encourage you to fill out all 4 of these boxes. I know that there are cases perhaps where you don't have quizzes in your class. If that's the case, then you don't necessarily need to fill out the quiz time because the student's never going to sign up to take a quiz in the testing center for your class if you don't have quizzes in your class. And I know it's also the beginning of the semester when you're filling this out and things may change, but if you fill out all 4 of the times for exam, final, midterm, and quiz, then that way the student can sign up for each of those exams or each of those test types. If you only fill out exam time, Then when finals roll around and the student needs to sign up for their final exams, the system doesn't think that you have final exams in your class because that time was never filled out. The student would then have to sign up for just an exam, and that time may be different than the final exam time. Oftentimes, professors allow perhaps 50 minutes for an exam and 120 minutes for a final. When you're completing the testing contract, double check that the information you're submitting is for the correct course and section. You'll only need to fill out one testing contract per section of the course. So if you have a class with multiple sections and you have 2 students with a disability in 2 different sections of the same course, you'll have to fill out 2 different testing contracts. If you have 2 students with a disability who are in one section of the course, you'll only have to fill out one testing contract, and that will apply to both students because they're in the same section of that course. If you do choose to proctor an exam yourself, just feel free to contact Disability Support Services. That way we can all ensure that the students will receive the appropriate accommodations in the environment that you're providing. So the new process is that students are not able to go online and schedule an exam until the testing contract has been completed. The testing contract will extend throughout the entirety of the semester, and it'll extend to other students who have testing accommodations in that same course and section, as I stated before. Just as before, the student never is required to use their testing accommodations for all exams in your course. An analogy we like to use in our office is that once a student has completed an intake appointment and been confirmed eligible for certain accommodations, they have sort of a buffet of accommodations. They may then pick and choose which accommodations they think they need to use in which classes. So even though you know a student has testing accommodations for a class and you know you have an upcoming exam in your class, unless you hear from our office that the student has signed up for the exam, it is best to assume that the student is taking the exam in the class and they chose not to use their accommodations. Before a student can sign up for an exam in the class, to use the testing center for an exam in the class, the students need to read and acknowledge our rules and guidelines, which I'll show you on the next slide. And the student is required to sign up for individual exams 3 days ahead. That is still the same as before. A caveat there is that we do try to accommodate students as much as possible. We understand things may happen and a student might be a day late or so. So while we do ask and try to enforce the 3 business day rules, we also try and accommodate as much as possible. So it is possible that you might get a notification the day before that a student is planning to use the testing center. The professor will receive a notification, but you'll really have very minimal work to do on your end after the testing contract is complete. I think an important thing to note as well is that once you fill out that testing contract, you'll receive an automated email from the DSS portal or AIM back to your email that details the testing center contract that you had just filled out. I would encourage you to save that email. That way you can reference it when you have that student sign up for exams in your class, and perhaps you had filled out the contract 2 months ago and you can't remember what exactly you put on it. If you save that email, you'll be able to see that contract that you filled out, and then if you need to make modifications, you can easily email the LRC testing account and let us know what you would like changed on the contract. Here is a copy of what the student needs to review before they're able to sign up for their test. At the bottom of this contract for the student, they have to type in their name and acknowledge that they have read through these policies and procedures before they're able to sign up for their exams. This is what you will receive once a student signs up for an exam in your class. The testing contract was already completed, the student signed up, and then you'll receive this email. It says the student's name, the class that they're taking a test for, what type of exam it is, the date and time, and the length. I would encourage you to pay attention to the date and the time, and if you have an issue with it, to please let our office know. We do ask that students take their test at the same date and time as the class. Unless there's a conflict with one of their other classes, then we do encourage them to work out with the professor first, a different time that the professor approves before they sign up for that in the testing center. But if you do have an issue with the date or time, please email the LRC testing account and we will get it figured out and come up with an alternative time that works for everybody. You can also see on this on this letter the accommodations that have been requested to be used on the exam, and these are only accommodations that the student has already been deemed eligible for. Sort of an overview of how AIM will help us serve our disability support services students better. It's set up so that the professor fills out one form, and that's really it. You'll still receive notifications when an individual student chooses to take a test in the testing center, so you are always made aware of those students testing in the testing center. In the notification email, there'll be a link where you can upload the exam, so you never have to worry about printing multiple copies of exams or delivering them to the testing center. You just upload the exam, and then in the testing center, we'll be able to print out as many copies as are needed. You can also respond to the notification email and modify specific exam requests with more detailed proctoring instructions. Again, that's when you might want to have saved that email that you got from the system when you filled out the testing contract. So you can refer to that and see if you need to make any changes. If not, you can leave it as is, and we'll be all good to go in proctoring the student's exam in the testing center. If you have any questions related to disability support services or AIM, please feel free to reach out to either Celeste Belbar, the director of the LRC, or Kelsey Finkbeiner, our support services coordinator and interim DSS coordinator at this time. Thank you for your time.